The elevator jolted like it had second thoughts about carrying anyone upward, and in that half-second of freefall panic, Caleb Hart understood, viscerally, embarrassingly, that his life had been stalled longer than this machine ever would be. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing with the same tired persistence as his thoughts, and his stomach lurched the way it used to when overdue bills arrived folded too neatly in white envelopes. He grabbed the metal rail without realizing it, knuckles whitening, breath catching in his throat, the taste of burnt coffee still clinging to his tongue from a rushed morning that had already gone wrong. The elevator stopped. Not gently, not heroically. It stopped with a tired sigh, like an old man sitting down too fast. Silence followed, thick, awkward, unmistakably human. Caleb stared at the glowing red, 2, above the door and thought, of course. 2 floors. That's as far as I get. It was 7:42 a.m., a Tuesday in January, the kind of Midwestern winter morning where the cold didn't just bite, it judged. Outside, Mapleton, Ohio was wrapped in a pale gray frost, snowbanks pushed into crooked walls by city plows, clapboard houses hunched against the wind like they'd learned long ago not to expect mercy. Caleb lived 3 blocks away in a rented duplex with peeling paint and a radiator that hissed like it had secrets. He could have walked to the Barton building, but the sidewalks were slick and his boots, scuffed leather with one cracked sole, were losing the argument with ice more often these days. Inside the elevator with him were 4 other people, none of whom he knew well, which somehow made it worse. To his left stood Marjorie Wilkes, late 60s, bundled in a maroon wool coat with a brooch shaped like a maple leaf pinned proudly at the collar. Her silver hair was sprayed into submission, her purse clutched like a shield. She smelled faintly of peppermint and old paper. Caleb knew her only as the lady who volunteers at the library and corrects your grammar without raising her voice. Behind him leaned Derek Lawson, early 30s, broad-shouldered, wearing a Carhartt jacket dusted with drywall residue. A contractor, maybe, the kind of guy who nodded instead of smiled. Earbuds dangled uselessly around his neck, as if he'd removed them out of politeness or surrender. Across from Caleb stood Lena Ortiz, mid-20s, dark curls tucked into a knit beanie, holding a reusable coffee cup that read, "Still tired." She worked at the community health clinic on the first floor and always looked like she was running late for something important, which she probably was. And then there was Howard Bell. Howard was impossible to miss. Early 70s, tall, stooped, wearing a tan trench coat that belonged to another decade. He had a mustache that looked carefully negotiated rather than grown and wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. He held a folded newspaper under one arm like a prop he refused to abandon. Caleb had seen him around town, always polite, always alone. 5 strangers. 1 stalled elevator. No cell signal. The silence stretched. The elevator hummed, then went quiet again, like it was listening. Marjorie cleared her throat. "Well," she said, voice crisp but edged with nerves, "this is unexpected." No one laughed. No one responded. Caleb felt the familiar itch behind his eyes, the urge to disappear, to press himself into the corner and wait until life resumed without demanding anything from him. Small talk had never been his thing. He was 34 years old and still felt like he'd missed the class where everyone learned how to casually exist around other people. He thought of his job, or lack of one. The warehouse had downsized 3 months ago, and he'd been temporarily released, which felt a lot like being gently shoved off a moving train. Since then, he'd been piecing together hours at the hardware store, doing odd jobs, telling himself it was fine, temporary, just a season. But seasons had a way of overstaying. The elevator jerked again, lights dimming. Lena let out a short laugh. Okay, that didn't help. Derek checked his phone, frowned, and slid it back into his pocket. No signal. Howard tapped the newspaper against his palm. "In my day," he said mildly, "elevators broke because people didn't trust electricity. Now they break because we trust it too much." Caleb surprised himself by snorting. It escaped before he could stop it, a sharp, awkward sound that echoed slightly off the metal walls. 4 heads turned toward him. Heat climbed up his neck. "Sorry," Caleb muttered. Yeah." Howard smiled. Not big, not forced, just enough. The elevator settled into a deeper silence, but something had shifted. The air wasn't quite as tight. Marjorie sighed and adjusted her purse. "I suppose this is what they call a forced pause." "That's one way to put it," Lena said. "I've got a patient in 10 minutes, so I'm officially panicking." Derek shrugged. "Boss'll understand. He always does when it's not his time." That earned a chuckle from Marjorie. Caleb stared at the floor tiles, gray, scratched, practical, and felt a strange pressure behind his ribs. Like maybe this was his moment to say something. Anything. The narrator of his own life, the one who watched from a safe distance and added commentary, cleared its throat. Go on, the voice said. Say the thing. Worst case, you're still stuck. He swallowed. So, Caleb said, voice quieter than he intended, does this count as bonding or hostage negotiation? Lena laughed out loud this time. Derek's lips twitched. Marjorie smiled despite herself. Howard nodded approvingly. Depends who escapes first. The tension loosened. Words began to tumble, tentative at first, then faster. They talked about the weather, because of course they did. About how winter in Mapleton felt longer than it used to, about snowstorms that came sideways and left everyone humbled. Marjorie mentioned the library's new heating system that clanged like a haunted house. Derek complained about frozen pipes and clients who didn't believe in insulation. Lena confessed she'd spilled coffee on herself twice that morning and taken it as a sign. Caleb listened more than he spoke, but for once, that didn't feel like hiding. It felt like witnessing. Howard unfolded his newspaper and pointed to a headline. Local diner changing ownership, he read. That place fed half this town for 40 years. My dad used to take me there after Little League, Derek said. Best pancakes I ever had. They still good? Lena asked. Good enough to forgive the decor, Marjorie said dryly. Caleb felt something warm bloom in his chest, something dangerously close to belonging. The elevator shuddered again. A mechanical voice crackled overhead. Attention passengers. We are aware of the issue. Please remain calm. Howard raised an eyebrow. That's always comforting. Minutes passed. Then more minutes. Time stretched, softened. Caleb found himself talking about his old job, about the warehouse, about how he'd thought he'd be there forever until forever turned out to be seasonal. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't joke it away. He just said it. I keep thinking I missed my window, he admitted, surprising himself again. Like everyone else figured something out and I was, elsewhere. No one rushed to fix it. No one offered platitudes. Marjorie nodded slowly. Windows don't close, she said. They get drafty. Big difference. Lena smiled at him. Also, half of us are winging it. Derek grunted. All of us, he corrected. Howard folded his paper. I retired twice, he said. Neither time stuck. They laughed. Caleb laughed with them, a real laugh, one that didn't feel borrowed. Finally, with a groan and a lurch, the elevator began to move again. The doors opened on the second floor, sunlight spilling in through the hallway windows, dust motes dancing like they'd been waiting. For a moment, no one moved. Well, Lena said softly, that was something. They stepped out together, slower than necessary. Caleb watched them disperse, Marjorie toward the stairs, Derek toward the construction office, Lena toward the clinic, Howard lingering a second longer. Howard looked at Caleb. Same time tomorrow, he said, deadpan. Caleb smiled. Only if it breaks again. Howard tipped his hat, an actual hat, Caleb realized, and walked away. Caleb stood there for a moment, heart lighter than it had been in months. The elevator doors closed behind him with a soft chime. The narrator leaned in, amused. If Caleb Hart were honest, and honesty had been sneaking up on him lately, he would admit that the elevator incident should have ended as a story he told once and then forgot. A funny thing that happened. A pause between real events. The kind of anecdote people use to fill silence at dinner parties they don't actually enjoy. Instead, it followed him. Not loudly, not dramatically. It followed him the way warmth lingers in a room after the heater clicks off, quiet, invisible, impossible to ignore once you notice it. The next morning in Mapleton, Ohio, winter arrived early and unapologetic. Snow hadn't fallen overnight, but the cold had settled deeper, seeping into the sidewalks, into the bones of the town. The sky hung low and pale, like it was thinking about snow but hadn't committed yet. Caleb woke before his alarm, staring at the water-stained ceiling of his duplex, listening to the radiator knock like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. He lay there longer than usual, hands folded on his chest, thinking about something dangerously simple. I didn't feel invisible yesterday. That thought alone felt rebellious. He got dressed slower than usual, choosing the cleaner flannel, tugging on his winter coat with a bit more care. When he caught his reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, dark circles under his eyes, hair still refusing to cooperate, he didn't flinch the way he usually did. He looked present. Outside, Mapleton stretched awake. Pickup trucks rumbled down Main Street. A flag snapped sharply in the cold outside City Hall. The smell of burned toast drifted from somewhere nearby, mixing with exhaust and frost. Caleb walked instead of taking the bus, boots crunching against frozen gravel, breath fogging the air. He wasn't late for anything. He just wanted time. The Barton building rose out of the morning like it always had. 5 stories, brick facade, stubbornly practical. The kind of building that existed to be useful, not impressive. Caleb hesitated at the entrance, gloved hand resting on the cold metal handle. The narrator, who had been watching with interest lately, leaned back in its chair. "Go on," it said. "Let's see if lightning strikes twice." Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. Caleb stepped toward the elevator, then stopped. The stairwell door was propped open. He almost laughed. "Of course," he murmured. He took the stairs, 2 flights, legs protesting the cold, and emerged on the second floor just as the elevator doors slid open with a cheerful ding. Out stepped Lena Ortiz, already mid-sentence. "I swear, if one more person tells me to just breathe, She stopped when she saw him. "Hey, elevator guy." Caleb smiled. "Clinic hero." She laughed, pulling off her gloves. "You taking the stairs now?" "Traumatized. Building trust issues," he said. "How's your morning?" She rolled her eyes affectionately. "Busy. Always busy. You?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Walking. That counts," she said. "See you later." "Yeah," he said, surprised at how natural it sounded. "Yeah." As she disappeared down the hall, Caleb stood there a second longer, something humming quietly under his ribs. This happened again and again over the following weeks. Not the elevator breaking, thankfully, but the running into people. Small moments. Familiar faces becoming familiar. He saw Derek Lawson outside the hardware store one afternoon, wrestling plywood into the back of his truck while muttering at the laws of physics. "Need a hand?" Caleb asked. Derek looked up, squinting, then grinned. "Elevator guy." They loaded the wood together, breath steaming, hands numb. Derek mentioned a short-term job, nothing fancy, just patchwork repairs on an old duplex. Caleb said yes before fear could clear its throat. He ran into Marjorie Wilkes at the library, where she cornered him gently near the history section. "You know," she said, adjusting her glasses, "we're starting a conversation group. For people who want to talk and don't know where to start." "That's specific," Caleb said. She smiled. "I specialize." And then there was Howard Bell, who seemed to appear everywhere now, on park benches, at the diner, leaning against the railing near the frozen pond like he'd been assigned there by fate. Howard invited him for coffee, then breakfast, then chess at the community center, where Howard lost deliberately and pretended not to. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. Snow finally fell, thick and unapologetic, reshaping Mapleton into something quieter, softer. Caleb's days filled, not completely, not magically, but enough to notice. He worked with Derek twice a week. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest. He joined Marjorie's conversation group and discovered that silence felt less threatening when shared. He met Lena for lunch sometimes, listening to her stories, learning when to joke and when to just sit with things. One evening, as the town prepared for the winter social, an annual event no one admitted to enjoying but everyone attended anyway, Caleb found himself standing in the Barton building lobby again. This time, the elevator doors were open. Inside stood Howard, Marjorie, Derek, and Lena. They all looked at him. Howard gestured grandly. "Coming." Caleb stepped in. The doors closed. The elevator moved. No jerking, no flickering, just smooth, steady ascent. Marjorie sighed. Honestly, disappointing. They laughed. As the elevator climbed, Caleb realized something subtle and profound. The space didn't feel smaller anymore. It felt shared. At the winter social, the community center buzzed with life. Folding tables, mismatched chairs, strings of warm lights sagging between beams. Someone had burned the chili. Someone else had brought store-bought cookies and pretended they hadn't. Caleb moved through the room, greeting people by name. By name. He helped Derek set up chairs. He laughed with Lena near the coffee urn. He listened to Marjorie debate local history with a teenager who hadn't expected to enjoy it. He played chess with Howard while a small crowd offered unsolicited advice. At one point, Caleb stepped outside for air. Snow drifted down gently, streetlights casting halos in the night. The town looked smaller than it used to, and stronger for it. The narrator leaned forward, voice softer now. "Here's the thing they don't tell you," it said. "Momentum doesn't come from grand plans. It comes from staying in the room." Caleb thought about the warehouse. About the bills. About the future, still uncertain and imperfect. But he also thought about laughter in an elevator. About showing up. about how saying something had led to everything else. Howard joined him outside, trench coat dusted with snow. Funny, Howard said, staring at the sky. I spent most of my life thinking connections were optional. Caleb nodded. Turns out they're structural. Howard smiled. Inside, someone called Caleb's name. He turned back toward the warmth. The elevator in the Barton building continued to work just fine after that. But Caleb understood now, it had done its job already. Sometimes, you don't rise because you're moving up. Sometimes, you rise because you stop pretending you were alone.
Like and subscribe if you want to be happy and motivate.